So today we're going to talk about homeostasis as a process because you guys are going to have a homeostasis project where you explore 3 different body systems. This will be the last project of the school year, so we can all be excited for that. And I wanted to make sure I gave you a really good picture of what homeostasis is before you get started on the project so you know, you have a better idea of what you want to choose from. Okay, so homeostasis. Okay, what is homeostasis? It is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. It is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. For example, when you go to the doctor and they take your temperature, what should it be? 98.6-ish, okay? That is a constant temperature, right? What would happen to you if your internal temperature was 20 degrees? You'd be dead, okay? So that's the whole concept of homeostasis, is maintaining everything in you the way it is so that you can keep living. So this constant internal environment in response to changes in external environment, right? If you go to Antarctica, your body has to work harder to do homeostasis to make sure that you don't freeze to death. And the changing conditions of the internal environment. If you drink a whole bunch of water, then your body has to cope with that somehow, right? If you don't drink enough water, your body has to cope with that somehow. So the internal conditions are always changing and your external conditions are always changing, right? It could be 90 degrees today, it could rain tomorrow. Your body still needs to maintain that 98.6 degrees. So why is homeostasis achieved? What is the importance of it, okay? The importance of homeostasis is to maintain cells, tissues, and entire organisms within their biological tolerance limits. Can your internal temperature be 300 degrees? No. No. That is outside of our biological tolerance limit, right? Various mechanisms have evolved. So we're going to look at some of these different mechanisms in which homeostasis is achieved. So how is homeostasis achieved? The first way homeostasis is achieved is with structural ways of dealing with our environment, okay? So structurally, animals and plants have particular physical features which help its survival in otherwise hostile environments. So an example of this might be the fact that plants have xylem and phloem inside their stems to move sugar and water throughout the entire plant, right? That helps the plant maintain homeostasis. In terms of functional processes, so the metabolism of the animal or plant is able to adjust to changes in conditions as they are detected. All right, so for example, if you don't eat breakfast, will you die? No. No, okay? Your body can handle that. It can be like, all right, we're going to burn some fat to keep you a little energy for the morning until you get to eat again. Or if you eat too much, do you just barf immediately? No. No, your body stores it as extra energy, right? Or fat. Behaviorally, so the actions and interactions of the individual, either alone or with others, help it survive in its particular environment. If I turn the air conditioning down to 40 degrees right now, what would most of you put on? A jacket. That is a behavioral way of keeping homeostasis in check, right? If all of a sudden I passed out and stopped breathing, what would you do? Call 911? Okay? That's a behavioral action. You wouldn't hopefully, you wouldn't just be like, oh, free period. So maintaining homeostasis through behavior changes Okay, some examples of homeostasis that are happening is, here's this bear going for a swim, about to. Here's this cow, he's hiding in the shade, right, to cool off. These lizards, you can see that second one is much more blended into the tree, right? That's a chameleon, so it can change its colors so that it fits in and it's less likely to be eaten. So one of the really important things about homeostasis is this idea of feedback mechanisms. This is like the main info you need for your project, okay? So a feedback mechanism is a general mechanism of the nervous or hormonal regulation in animals. We all know what hormones are? Yeah. Okay. You're in high school, so I figured at this point you've had that talk. That you're going through special changes, right? But hormones can even be things that control your muscle development. They control a lot of other things too. So negative feedback is when the response diminishes the original stimulus. That is really important. Negative feedback is when the response diminishes the original stimulus. A positive feedback, on the other hand, is when the response enhances the original stimulus. So do you think you're going to need to know the difference between positive and negative? Yes. Okay. Negative feedback diminishes the original stimulus, so it reduces it, makes it stop. Positive feedback keeps it going. Okay, feedback loops. So feedback mechanisms have certain essential components. Every feedback loop has these basic components that are a part of it, all right? So the first one is the stimulus, the change from an ideal or resting condition. So you're in here, we have air conditioning, it's pretty nice. All of a sudden, you go outside, it's 110 degrees. And your body is like, no, why? Why is it so hot? Then you have the receptor, right? So the stimulus is the actual temperature, 110 degrees. The receptor is the cells or the tissue which detects the change due to the stimulus. As soon as you walk out into 100-degree weather, you feel it on your skin, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like when it feels like you just hit that wall of heat. How many of you ever go out to the desert, like out in the desert, Mojave? Yes. It's like 120. That hits you like a wall, doesn't it? The next is the relay. The relay is the transmission of the message via nerves or hormones or both to the effector. So it's 110 degrees outside. That's the stimulus. The receptor is your skin, right? Are the cells and tissues that go, holy crap, it's really hot out here. That relays hormones and nerves to the brain, right? So that's relaying the message. Okay, so it's relaying the fact that your skin is hot due to the 110-degree temperature, right? So the effector are the cells or tissue which cause a response to happen. What happens to your skin if you are outside in 110-degree heat?
It gets hot.
You what? Sweat, exactly. Okay, so now your sweat glands are going to be like, hey, what's up? We heard it's hot out here. Okay, so as a response, your body, okay, an action at the cell, tissue, or whole organism level would not have occurred in the absence of the stimulus. So the fact that you start sweating, what's another thing we do when it's hot outside? What if you're wearing your jacket inside? What would you do if you walked out into 110-degree heat? Take your jacket off? That's a behavioral one, right? People do this, start fanning themselves, right? You're like, whoo, it is hot out here. That's another behavioral response, okay? So those are all different responses to this feedback loop. And the ultimate feedback, the consequence of the response on the stimulus may be positive or negative. When you sweat, what does that do to your temperature?
Lowers it.
It lowers it. Very good. So it cools you back down. So this would be an example of negative feedback because it's diminishing the response. Your body temperature started to rise because it was so hot outside. So you started sweating. That caused evaporative cooling. Now your body is not as hot. Negative feedback loop. So here was our example of a negative feedback loop. I blanked some of these out, so you'll have to fill your chart in as you go. But you get that stimulus, right? A homeostatic condition is challenged. For example, the temperature or how much sugar is in your blood or whatever it is, right? The receptors get the memo that there is a stimulus and that homeostasis is being thrown off. It relays the message to the control center, which is usually your brain, okay? And then it releases effectors, which says, yes, now is a good time to sweat. And what do? You sweat. And that eliminates change from the stimulus and returns homeostasis back to its original state. A positive feedback loop works very similarly, okay? But at the end, the response does what? What does the response do? It strengthens the stimulus, okay? So if you had a really bad fever, right, and you don't take any Advil, and it keeps going up and up, you know what I'm talking about? Like, and you're like, oh crap, it's getting close to 105, which is like where you really don't want to be at. That's a positive feedback. The stimulus is being sick, just throwing off your homeostatic condition, okay? So your body responds by creating a fever to try and kill off the bacteria or virus or whatever infection it is. So your control center says, hey, we're going to raise the temperature and try and kill off this infection. The effectors send the thing, now your temperature, your response is like 102 degrees. But if that infection does not respond to increasing the temperature, your body will increase the temperature again, and your fever will go up, and you'll redo this process over and over, possibly in some cases until you die. So, it is important to know negative feedback is the most common in biological systems. Here's another example of negative feedback, right? We all have a thermostat in our house, hopefully, if you're lucky, okay? House cools the thermostat, closes the circuit, furnace turns on, warming the house, the temperature goes back that way. Once the house warms up, the thermostat cuts off, and then the furnace turns off so the house cools, right? It's maintaining that constant temperature, just like we talked about within ourselves, okay? Examples of negative feedback include blood glucose concentrations. They rise after you eat a sugary meal, which is the stimulus. As a result, insulin is released, and it speeds up the transport of glucose out of the blood and into your cells, which is the response. So blood glucose concentrations decrease, thus decreasing the original stimulus. So that would be negative feedback. What are diabetic type 1 people missing? Do you guys know in this process? So type 1 diabetics are missing the hormone insulin, which is why they can go into a diabetic coma, because the glucose concentrations will go so high and they have no way to keep that homeostasis intact. So instead, they can pass out and die. It's pretty crazy. Other examples of negative feedback. Exercise creates metabolic heat, which raises the body temperature, right? As a result, your cooling mechanisms such as vasodilation, which is when all your blood vessels near your skin start to open up a little bit more, so it's easier for you to lose heat through your skin, and sweating begin. and the body temperature falls, thus decreasing the original stimulus. Positive feedback is less common, which is understandable as most changes to steady state pose a threat, okay? And to enhance them would not be helpful. Examples of positive feedback is breastfeeding, okay? Like these puppies on the dog, or that baby and the mom. So a baby begins to suckle her mother's nipple, and a few drops of milk are released, which is the stimulus. This encourages the baby and releases a hormone in the mother, which further stimulates the release of milk. And the hungry baby continues to suckle, stimulating more milk release until she stops, or he stops. Other examples of positive feedback: a ripening apple releases a volatile plant hormone called ethylene, which is the stimulus. Ethylene accelerates the ripening of unripe fruit in its vicinity, so nearby fruit also starts to ripen, releasing more ethylene. And all the fruit starts releasing even more ethylene until they're all ripe. Which is why if you have one bad apple in a bag, the whole bag will go bad faster than if you took it out. That's where the saying comes from, right? One bad apple can ruin a bunch. Can ruin the bunch. Something like that. It's an old person saying. So overall, homeostasis is stable operating conditions in the internal environment, right? Your heart needs to keep beating no matter what happens. So 3 components interact. You have the receptor, which is free nerve endings in the skin, an integrator, such as the brain, and the effector, such as a muscle or gland, and that gives you a response, the system's output. Okay? The response to the stimulus leads to change. The change is the feedback to the receptor, and negative feedback, the response of the system cancels or counteracts the original stimulus. And that is our lecture for homeostasis. You will find that there are a few questions on the back. You need to work with your table partners to answer those questions. And that's it for this one.